Hi, I'm Reba from the Mystery Box Show. Today's storyteller shared their story with us on one of our recent live streams, and we're delighted to bring it to you today. So please enjoy this story from Esther Godoy.
I was on my way to the first lesbian bar I'd been to, and I didn't really think of myself as queer at that time. In fact, I hadn't really accessed my sexuality at all. I was really just looking for some friends. I was desperate to find a place where I'd fit in. You see, femininity had never really come naturally to me. I was the kind of young girl that loved skateboarding, and I listened exclusively to like punk rock and hip hop. So as I approached that bar, and I heard the sound of like Destiny's Child and Pink mashed together, blaring out of the sound system. I probably should have known in that moment that it wasn't going to be the place for me, but in the spirit of this quest, I pushed on. And as I stepped inside that bar and looked around, this wave of confusion came over me. You see, in place of the diverse group of rough and tumble lesbians I had expected to find, was this sea of dykes that looked exactly like Avril Levine. It felt like there were almost like over 100 of them littered around this bar. They were like standing up against walls and holding pool cues and glaring at each other. I couldn't understand how they appeared to be so calm, cool, and collected, whilst at the same time being so meticulously presented. Every single one of them had perfect long straightened hair, a backwards baseball cap, loose fitting jeans, and a midriff tank top. And the creme de la creme to top the uniform off was a chained wallet. And I looked around a little longer, and it kind of became clear to me that this uniform was like this unspoken law that everybody had to abide to in order to have access to this space and everyone in it. I looked down at what I was wearing, which was like this size 34 baggy men's jeans and this big black hoodie. I stood out like a sore thumb. So I thought I'd check out the patio to see if it was maybe more my scene. And I went out there and I took a seat, and not long after, two of these Avril Lavines came out and sat right in front of me. And they didn't know I was there, so I started eavesdropping on them. And Avril Lavigne, number one, turned to her friend and said, God, if I ever grow up to look like that, I'm going to need you to like beat the shit out of me. And then Avril Lavigne, number two, looked at number one and was like, I fully don't get it. Like, do they just want to dress like men, or are they actually trying to be men or something? And it wasn't hard to figure out who they were talking about. It was the only people in the bar that didn't look exactly like them. It was a group of older women, maybe in their 50s, and they had these like perfectly shaved buzzcut heads and these white starchy T-shirts under leather jackets, and they were smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey, and I could tell by the furrows in their brows and the way that their shoulders slunk over that they'd experienced like far more adversity in their lives than either me or any of these Avril Lavines ever had. So I looked over at the Avrils and then back at this group of older butch dykes and back at the Avrils again. And to be honest, like I couldn't quite see myself in either of these groups of people, but innately I knew that I was probably closer to the older butch dykes. So I really had this that this wasn't going to be the place for me. And I left the bar that night and I felt lonelier and more invisible and more isolated than when I'd gone in. At that time in my life, I felt like the only young woman in the world who didn't understand how to embody some kind of femininity. So I did try to go back to that bar a few times, and each time I'd try on like one item of this Avril Lavigne uniform, but man, I could never make it work. Like it just didn't come naturally to me. So I gave up on the dyke bars and I decided to throw myself back into the one thing that I enjoyed the most at that time, which was skateboarding. And it was by accident, but skateboarding gave me this wonderful environment where I was able to express my masculinity without being confronted about it on a daily basis. You see those big baggy jeans and that big hoodie and that like trucker cap I'd wear off to the side, like I could blame that terrible sense of style on the fact that I was a skater, not the fact that I wanted to, look like a guy. And while skateboarding was like awesome for that at that time, there were barely any women that skated back then. And because of this, I was like kind of semi-professional, and I got invited to go on this women's skateboarding tour that left from Portland, Oregon, and ended at this big professional contest in Canada. And even though, I was in Australia at that time, I absolutely jumped at this opportunity because I was so desperate to find, a place where I might fit in or people that would understand me. So I booked a ticket like straight away and flew across the world. And the morning of the skate trip, I woke up and I threw all my things in a taxi and I, got myself to the meeting spot. And as soon as I got out of the taxi, somebody yelled out at me, "Oh, Esther, is that you?" And I said, yeah, I'm coming, it's me. And they yelled out, "Hurry up, you're running late already." And in that moment, like my palms got all sweaty and my heart had started racing. Like I was terrified that I had already pissed these people off. I was going to be a nuisance before they'd ever met me. And that it was just going to be another place that like I was an outsider and I didn't fit in. So like I scurried over to the van as quickly as I could with my eyes on the ground. And when I got there, almost everyone was in the van waiting to go. But as I lifted my head to my right, with short hair, cargo shorts, and an avocado tattoo on the back of her bicep, was the most majestic creature I'd ever seen. She was a butch lesbian, but she was the first butch lesbian that I had ever seen that I could almost see myself in. And I wanted to like emulate her. She was tall, she was handsome, like she was strong. She had this really kind smile, and she wiped her hand on her cargo shorts and extended one out to greet me. And she said, "Hi, I'm Moira. Help me with the rest of this stuff and we can get going." And in that moment, she could have asked me to have done anything and I would have said yes. And we got in the van, and as we did, she made some space next to her for me to sit down. And I don't know exactly what it was about her, but she had this wonderful energy. It was like that of both an older brother but also a mother. And even though I didn't know her, I immediately felt like so calm and so seen in her presence. And over the next 2 weeks, me and Moira became like the best of buddies. And I learned almost everything I needed to know at that time about being a butch lesbian through watching her and how she like navigated the world and interacted with people and how they responded to her. And I remember one of the first towns that we stopped in on the skate trip was this tiny little middle of nowhere town in Montana. And the first thing we do when we got to these towns was we try and find the skate park. So we rolled into the parking lot of the skate park, and it was a beautiful summer evening. The sun was just starting to set. We were all ready to stretch our legs. And as I looked out to the right, I saw this big group of guys. And to me, they didn't look like skaters. Like they looked like the kind of guys I'd seen depicted in American films all through my childhood growing up. You know, the kind that drove like pickup trucks around and wore flannelette shirts with the sleeves cut off and drank way too much beer and had nothing better to do in those small towns than to look for trouble. And if you can picture like 10 tattooed women pouring out of this van from Portland with like skateboards under their arms, we were exactly the kind of trouble that these guys were looking to get into. And we kind of just ignored them and started skating. And not long after, they started shouting shit out at us. And I think the first thing was like pretty classic, like, "Are you girls or guys?" And we ignored them. We kept skating. And then a very original, "Show us your tits." And this wasn't out of the ordinary. Like, we were used to being shouted shit at. But the third thing I remember them yelling out was, "Why don't you come over here and talk to us? Or are you a pack of fucking dykes or something?" And that one had a lot more anger behind it and a lot more like volition. And we all looked at each other, and without even saying anything, I could tell we were all thinking the same thing, that like we needed to get the fuck out of there and quickly. We'd all heard the stories about like what happens to queer people and to women who don't fit the mold in small towns. So I looked up at the van and then over to this group of guys, and I was trying to figure out the easiest and quickest way to get out of there safely. But before I could even concoct a plan, I saw Moira like confidently striding over to this group of guys, and she like inserted herself in the middle of them. And it was all the way over the other side of the skate park, so I couldn't hear what she was saying. But after a minute or two, like they shake hands, and one of them hands her this like, I don't know, like a 6-pack of Bud Light or something. And as she's like retreating back to where we're sitting, the shouting totally like shifts, and it turns into like cheering and hooting and hollering for us every time we are landing tricks. And a few of the guys come over and they even ask us if they can have goes on our skateboards. And, when Moira finally got back to sit with us, I was like, "Dude, what did you say? Like, how did you do that?" And she wouldn't tell us, but she just like had this big smile on her face. And I watched her navigate these situations throughout that whole 2 weeks. And every time she had this way of commanding this respect from people but at the same time remaining, kind and empathetic. And she had this really wonderful way of being able to draw the playfulness out of anyone. And, for the rest of the trip, some of the memories that really stuck out to me was how Morris could so confidently and easily just talk to and flirt with women. And she'd do that with the kind of women that I thought were absolutely out of bounds for any Butch dyke to ever talk to, let alone think about making out with. And then what surprised me doubly was how they would respond to her positively. They would blush and smile and flirt back and joke with her. And it was like my limited understanding of what it meant to be a lesbian was just transforming in front of my eyes. And when we got back to Portland, I had 2 or 3 more days before I was going to be sent back, to Australia. And over that time, Moira taught me a couple more things before she sent me on my way. And the first one was that she told me I was allowed to walk into a barbershop and ask for any haircut I wanted. I had no idea I was allowed to do that as a woman. So I did. And I got this this fade all the way down to my skin and this perfectly manicured side part I had. And then we went shopping and she taught me how to, buy clothes from the men's section, or in my case, the little boys section. But by the end of that trip, I was absolutely on top of the world. I'd transformed from that awkward little baby dyke Avril Levine wannabe into the Butch dyke skateboarding trucker cowboy of my dreams. And when I got back home to Melbourne, it was like coming home to myself. I looked in the mirror and for the first time, I actually liked what I saw. And it was truly like meeting myself for the first time. I started to believe that other people might like what they saw as well. And in that moment, something I'd never had access to, my sexuality, just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I started noticing women everywhere, and I was attracted to women all over the place. And every time I saw them, I'd get these butterflies in my stomach. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to those dyke bars. But this time, I'm not going to go just to find friends. I'm going to go to try and find some people to make out with. So I did. And every time I'd go to those dyke bars or those dyke nights, I'd put on my best flannelette shirt. I'd button it right up to the neck here. I'd have really nice fitting jeans and these big red wing boots I'd tie up. And quite frankly, I'd put far too much hair gel in my hair. But I'd walk into these spaces and I'd think of Moira and how confidently and easily she walked through the world. And I'd, try and do the same thing. And I just faced rejection after rejection after rejection over and over again. Nobody was interested in me, not for platonic friendships, certainly not for romantic relationships. And there was just only so much of it I could take before I started to question myself. And this happened over a period of weeks, months, the whole year. And slowly that memory of myself and everything that had happened in Portland started to fade. And I kind of retreated back into wearing those big baggy clothes that just covered my body. And to be honest, I got quite depressed and I was almost ready to just let it all go. But I just wasn't ready to give up on my Butch dyke dreams. So I knew what I had to do. I was going to book a ticket back to Portland for the next summer. And I was just going to check it out one more time before I gave up. So I did. And I booked that ticket back. And when I arrived in Portland, Moira was there at the airport waiting to pick me up. And she was leaning up against her old beat up 90s Toyota pickup truck. And I got in that thing and I was so excited to see her. And I told her all about the year I'd had and all about the shitty experiences I'd had at the dyke bars. And, she had so much empathy for me. She tapped me on the back and she was like, "Oh, buddy." And she thought about it. And after a minute or two, she was like, "Right, I know exactly what we're going to do tonight." So we went back to Moira's house and we began the ritual of getting ready to go out with each other. And, we chose, and it was the middle of summer. So I was wearing a button-up shirt with short sleeves, and we'd help each other roll the sleeves up on either side so they were even, and we'd put pomade through our hair. And I remember her giving me this masculine scented cologne to wear, which I'd never had before. And when we were just about ready to go out, we looked at each other and we gave each other a little high five, and we were like, "Yeah, we look like $1 million." Got back into that blue Toyota pickup truck and drove off into the sunset. And she turned to me and she said, "Esther, I'm going to take you to the E Room tonight. It's Portland's longest standing lesbian bar, and I think you're going to love it." And that familiar sense of anxiety washed over me. I didn't I wasn't ready to go back into those dyke spaces again. Like, I didn't just want to feel rejected and shit about myself. Like, that's not how I wanted to spend my time in Portland. But I thought about it, and I really trusted Moira, and I felt really calm around her. So, you know, against my better judgment, I was like, I'm just gonna let it happen. And when we got out at the E room, I took one step inside and I looked around. And between the neon Bud Light signs and the pool table and like Melissa Etheridge blaring out of the karaoke room, I saw the most beautiful vision I'd ever seen. That bar was filled with butch lesbians, old ones, young ones, every age in between. There were femme dykes everywhere. There were even some of those Avril Levines I knew so well from back at home. But they weren't all standing around like being cruel and glaring at each other. They were all interacting with each other and enjoying each other's company and like celebrating the space they had in life. It just looked so much fun and so welcoming. And in that moment, like my heart and my face must have just absolutely lit up, because when I looked back at Moira, she was just like grinning from ear to ear, and she gave me a little nod as if to say, like, you know, off you go, get in there. And so I did. And I walked over to the bar and I got a beer. And when I looked to my left, there was this woman giving me the lesbian stare, which is when when a woman looks at you in a queer space for so long and so intensely that you're not sure if they want to like slap you across the face or make out with you. And I looked to my, like, behind my shoulders to make sure she wasn't looking at anyone else. And when I looked back at her, sure enough, she was still doing the stare. So I smiled. And she came over and she sat next to me, and we started talking and laughing and flirting and like having just a wonderful time. And moments later, her friends came and scooped her up and took her to the karaoke room. And before I could even get across the room back to Moira, another woman intercepted me and did the exact same thing. And that happened to me all night long. I couldn't get a second to myself. And it started to dawn on me that there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with being a butch lesbian. And, you know, I didn't have to change who I was to try and fit into a community that just had a different value system. I just had to do a bit of detective work and find the community and the space that loved me and accepted me just how I was. And I still think about Moira all the time. We're still fantastic friends to this day. And I'll always be so grateful that she was like proud and brave and strong out there in the world as a butch dyke, because it gave me permission to do the same. And now I can be a Katie Lang amongst any sea of Avril Levines, beaming brightly for any baby butchers who might need to find their way. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. And of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell to be notified of all of our upcoming live streams and confession corners. See you next time.